For 3 standard years, armies of mechanized soldiers marched upon battlefields all over the galaxy. To some, they were conquerors, trampling over their beloved republic and wanting to destroy everything they stood for, while to others, they were liberators, come to save them from their failing union, as their representatives' corruption and decadence decayed the principles of the republic. Let's talk about them. Sukui Gar Nervod. I am Tad Larkin, the lore master of Manda-LORE, and today I'll be digging through the archives to bring you organizational data and the history of the CIS. Though its brief existence served only as a puppet state in which to initiate a galaxy-wide war and bring forth the downfall of the Republic and the Jedi, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, or CIS for short, had a significant impact on the lives of numerous disenfranchised galactic citizens who believed in its ideals as a better alternative to the Republic. But just where did this confederacy come from? How did its government function? What kind of droids did it utilize? And how were its droid armies and navies organized? The origins of the CIS can be traced back to the coalescence of one of its core founding members, the Trade Federation, 350 years before the Battle of Yavin. Back then, the Trade Federation was actually a force for good, mediating disputes between suppliers and shipping companies, as well as helping prevent the rise of monopolies gutting consumers. The Trade Federation Defense Force aided in keeping the shipping lanes in the Outer Rim safe for commerce. Meanwhile, the Trade Federation Explorer Corps blazed new trade routes, opening new corridors as well as new markets. And by 124 BBY, the Senate declared the Outer Rim a free trade zone, which, unburdened by taxes, allowed the Trade Federation to grow into the very thing it was created to prevent: a shipping cartel. However, since the earliest years of the Galactic Republic's expansion into the wider galaxy, there has always been a growing disparity between the wealthy and influential worlds within the galactic core and the frontiers on the Outer Rim. And as the Republic continued to expand, so too did the core's exploitation of the Rim. Now enter the Sith, whose defeat during the Great Sith War in 1000 BBY caused them to go underground and reform under Darth Bane's Rule of Two, and it was their goal to further exacerbate this division to bring about the destruction of both the Republic and the Jedi Order, and none of the Baneite Sith did this better than Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious. Plagueis, in his guise as Hago Damask, a wealthy and influential Mune banker, and Sidious, in his as the up-and-coming Senator Palpatine from Naboo, used their sway and influence to instigate a series of events that created the right situations and put the right beings in the right places to create the perfect environment for a potential civil war. The declaration of free trade zones was soon followed by the extension of functional constituencies to megacorporations, like the Trade Federation and other conglomerates that grew to immense size and power, like the Techno-Union, Commerce Guild, Intergalactic Banking Clan, Corporate Alliance, etc., etc. This effectively meant that they no longer had to lobby senators to vote for favorable bills, and instead could form their own voting blocks to help pass or fail potential legislation, which worked perfectly for the Sith Master Plan. Guided by Sith hands, attacks on Trade Federation shipping in the Outer Rim by the Nebula Front pirates, as well as the manufactured Bacta shortage that resulted in the Stark hyperspace conflict of 44 BBY, granted them the ability to expand their defense forces by the Senate, and by the 30s BBY, the entire Trade Federation defense force was automated, and far larger than the Senate regulated. While Darth Sidious began manipulating a certain Neimoidian named Newt Gunray on the Trade Federation's Directorate Board, Senator Palpatine earned the ear of then Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum, and convinced him that the only way to curb the power of the Trade Federation and other conglomerates was to reintroduce taxation on the Outer Rim trade zones.
In 33 BBY, a summit on Valorum's homeworld of Iriadu to further negotiate the issue was held with the Trade Federation, Techno-Union, Commerce Guild, and others in attendance, but ended in turmoil when an assassination attempt conducted by the Nebula Front conveniently killed all of the Federation Directorate members except for Gunray, who then ascended to Viceroy of the Trade Federation, no doubt one of Sidious's schemes. Despite this fiasco, the Senate passed Resolution BR0371 anyways, and in turn, the Trade Federation retaliated against the new taxation by blockading Palpatine's homeworld of Naboo in 32 BBY, attempting to force the young Queen Amidala to sign a treaty making Naboo a Trade Federation constituent, and thus legalizing their occupation. We all know how that turned out. Following the Battle of Naboo and the lifting of the blockade, Gunray faced little to no repercussions for the crisis and remained Viceroy of the Trade Federation, and they retained their droid armies too. In fact, other future members of the CIS began following the Trade Federation's example and built up their own droid forces. The Intergalactic Banking Clan used their fearsome Hellfire droids to punish customers who defaulted on their loans, while the Corporate Alliance used their distinctive-looking NRN-99 Enforcer droids to change the definition of hostile takeover in the business world. The Techno-Union, on the other hand, built their own droid army for the sheer sake of it, just to see if they could engineer better droids, among others who maintained their own droid armies to protect their varied interests. The last piece of the puzzle was Dooku, a nobleman from Sereno and former Jedi. After years of disillusionment with the Jedi Order as well as the Republic, and the death of his most gifted Padawan, Qui-Gon Jinn, Master Dooku resigned from the Order, becoming the last of the Lost 20, and returning to his homeworld and his aristocratic title. The Count of Sereno was the perfect catalyst for Sidious's plans, now the sole Dark Lord of the Sith after his murder of Plagueis and the loss of his last Sith apprentice, Darth Maul. Palpatine had long ago befriended Dooku and helped sow his disillusionment with the government and the Jedi, so turning him to the dark side was effortless, dubbing him Darth Tyrannus. With his new Sith Master now the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, it was Tyrannus' mission to set up the opposition, and in 24 BBY, on the industrial world of Raxus Prime, at the heart of the historically anti-Republic Tion cluster, Dooku made his first public appearance in years, orating a rousing speech detailing his disdain for the Senate and his desire to secede from the Republic. What would become known as the Raxus Address was broadcasted all over the galaxy via hijacked HoloNet transceivers, and soon after, Dooku made the rounds on a speech circuit all across the Outer Rim. Attracted by the ideals of greater planetary autonomy and limited federal government oversight eliminating bloated bureaucracy, hundreds of worlds began leaving the Republic in droves, and throwing in their lot with Dooku's new Confederacy of Independent Systems. By 22 BBY, at least 1,000 worlds had seceded and joined the CIS, turning the Republic's Senate into a madhouse as debates raged across the rotunda. Some senators were keen to leave the Confederacy alone, advocating for peaceful coexistence between the two interstellar nation-states, while others noted heavily armed megacorporations taking an interest in their nascent rival posed a threat. And that threat could not be ignored, as flashpoints of violence began popping up all over the galaxy, and after excessive use of Jedi Force on Antar 4 and Ancion to keep them from joining the CIS, the Republic was forced to come to grips with the fact that it may need a standing army once again, as the Military Creation Act went back and forth in the Senate. It wasn't until Obi-Wan Kenobi, while investigating the now Senator Amidala's attempted assassination, stumbled upon the signing of a pact between these megacorporations to pledge themselves and their droid armies to Dooku and the Confederacy, that the Military Creation Act would gain any traction in the Senate. With the passing of the Emergency Powers Act to Palpatine, he in turn passed the Military Creation Act, kickstarting the Battle of Geonosis and the Clone Wars. Before continuing on with the Confederacy's history, let's dive into how its government operated, the chain of command, and the roles these megacorporations played within it. Unlike the Galactic Republic, which was a federal representative republic, the Confederacy of Independent Systems was just that, a confederacy. Thousands of independent star systems came together for mutual aid and defense. They selected their own rulers and officials, maintained their own governments, and passed their own laws which were followed within their own zones of influence. The CIS protected the sovereignty of its member systems and aided during times of crisis or invasion. Pulling all of the strings was of course Darth Sidious, who we already discussed. As he was coordinating the Republic's side of the war as Chancellor Palpatine, he directed his apprentice to launch offensives and counteroffensives, anything he needed to make the war look convincing and artificially create dire situations. Publicly leading the Confederacy of Independent Systems was the head of state, embodied by Count Dooku. The former Jedi Master was a powerful orator, possessing the charisma, gravitas, and long years working within the Republic's government necessary for swaying fence-sitting and disenfranchised planets to his cause. It wasn't known that Dooku was a Sith until after he revealed himself at the Battle of Geonosis. However, I can't find if this knowledge was public at the time. Even if it was, to ordinary galactic citizens, the Sith had been extinct for almost 1,000 years, and no one living remembered their atrocities, so to them, the Sith were merely another offshoot of the Jedi, and their long-standing rivalry looked more like a pedantic sectarian feud. In other words, they probably wouldn't have cared. Answering directly to Count Dooku, or more accurately his Sith identity, Darth Tyrannus, were his Dark Acolytes. These were dark side users who were recruited by Tyrannus to do his bidding, and were either brought into the fold starting out as Dark Jedi, as was the case with Asajj Ventress, or were Jedi who left the Order after disagreeing with their stance on the war, as was the case with many like Sora Bulg, Kadrian Zay, and Tol Skor. These Dark Acolytes also held ranks within the military, and would at times lead troops into battle, though which ranks they were commissioned was determined by their capabilities rather than their seniority. For example, Severance Tan was a gifted tactician, so she held the rank of general, while Asajj Ventress was more of a brute, so she only held the rank of commander. However, all of the Dark Acolytes were still subservient to the Supreme Commander of the CIS military. Next in the chain of command, underneath the head of state, is the Supreme Commander of the military, an office held by the Kaleesh cyborg General Grievous. Grievous commands both the combined droid armies and navies of the CIS, and had personally led numerous military campaigns against the Republic from the front lines. Apart from presiding over the Army High Command and the Admiralty, the Supreme Commander was also responsible for the protection of the Separatist Leadership Council, and in the event that the head of state is removed from office or dies, the Supreme Commander temporarily takes the head of state's responsibilities until a new one is established. Which brings us to the Separatist Leadership Council, made up of the 9 members of the most influential bodies and organizations within the CIS. While the Supreme Commander focused more on military matters, the Leadership Council exerted some control over the military, but mostly focused on logistics and some limited civilian matters, providing droid armies and ships to the military, and also funding/supplying those armies as well as the rest of the Confederacy. Comprising the Leadership Council was Newt Gunray, Viceroy of the Trade Federation, Poggle the Lesser, Archduke of the Stalgazen Hive on Geonosis, Wat Tambor, Foreman of the Techno Union, San Hill, Chairman of the Intergalactic Banking Clan, Shu Mai, President of the Commerce Guild, Pascal Argente, Magistrate of the Corporate Alliance, Poe Nudo, Leader of the Hypercommunications Cartel, Tikis, Leader of the Quarren Isolation League, and Ragwa Rodrada, Senator of the Falim Sector. Within these organizations laid the responsibility for keeping not just the war machine going, but the CIS itself alive. The Trade Federation keeping the Confederacy's shipping afloat, the Techno Union developing new weapons and droids for the military, the IG Banking Clan funding and backing the Confederacy's institutions, the Commerce Guild maintaining its economy and markets, the Corporate Alliance breaking up monopolies and cracking down on unfair business practices, and finally the Hypercommunications Cartel, operating and maintaining the Confederacy's hyperwave transceivers and broadcasting the CIS Shadowfeed propaganda news network. Apart from the Leadership Council, there were a host of former Republic senators who represented worlds that seceded and joined the Confederacy, and while there wasn't a definitive parliamentary body per se, as some later dramatized holo films portray, there could have been some sort of assembly for these officials to gather and bring up issues facing their worlds that they can't solve themselves with the Leadership Council, and from there, the Leadership Council could deliberate on solutions. Though it is far more likely that systems could have lobbied for aid with the Leadership Council directly, or up a chain of command through an appropriate organization. For example, a famine on Ando might require Trade Federation assistance to deliver aid, while an impending recession on Yag'Dul might require the banking clan to step in and start handing out bailouts. A majority of the worlds within the CIS were already constituent worlds of the 6 main organizations on the Leadership Council anyways, negating the need for a parliamentary body. There was no capital of the CIS per se, as the Leadership Council was constantly moved from planet to planet as the severity of the situation of the war intensified, but planets where the Leadership Council and the head of state resided over the years included Geonosis, Roxas Prime, Thule, Bospity, Belderone, Utapau, and Mustafar. Moving over to military matters, there were 2 distinct branches underneath the command of the Supreme Commander, and they were the Army and the Navy as discussed earlier. Both the Army High Command and the Admiralty were made up of flesh and blood generals and admirals, most of which were already affiliated with the 6 major megacorps and held commissions within their respective defense forces. While there were some droid models that possessed limited tactical capabilities, such as the OOM series command droid, organic living beings were more capable and trusted to lead military campaigns and coordinate large forces. Beginning with the Army, let's take a look at the different droids, vehicles, and equipment utilized by the Confederacy and how they were organized. Keep in mind that the CIS droid army was the amalgamation of 5 different droid armies: the Commerce Guild Punitive Security Force, the Corporate Alliance Policy Administration Directorate, the IGBC Collections and Security Division, the Techno Union Droid Army, and the Trade Federation Droid Army. So, for the interest of time, I'll be focusing on the most common models from all of these armies based on their combat roles. Starting with infantry, the most common infantry droid you'll see in the CIS armed forces is the standard B1 series battle droid armed with the Blastech E5 blaster, as well as its more elite counterpart, the B2 series super battle droid. These units were produced originally for the Trade Federation in the years before the Battle of Naboo, while the B2 was designed to improve upon the B1's flaws after the Battle of Naboo. The B1s were versatile in that they could perform logistical roles too, such as piloting vehicles and acting as scouts when flying the single trooper aerial platform or STAP speeder. The B2, on the other hand, was purely designed for battle, and had other more advanced variants based off of its chassis, such as the B3 Ultra Battle Droid and the CB3 Cortosis Battle Droid, designed to be lightsaber resistant. Some of the more specialized anti-infantry droids deployed in support of the B1s and B2s were the fearsome Trade Federation Droideka, the Techno Union's LM-432 Crab Droid, and the Commerce Guild's DSD-1 Dwarf Spider Droid, which could provide both infantry support and anti-vehicle support, and had several variants of its own. Then you have some of the extremely advanced droid models, such as Grievous's IG-100 series Magna Guards, the IG series Lancer droids, the A series Assassin droids, and the JK-13 security droid, designed to lure and kill Jedi with its enhanced organic processors. Honorable mention to my 2 favorite droid models that don't quite fit in the infantry category but aren't really vehicles either: the Acrid Industries Spelunker class probe droid, which can cloak, lay mines, and has triple repeating blasters, and the Scorponech Annihilator droid, a shielded anti-vehicle droid that could one-shot ATTEs. Before moving on to vehicles, it's necessary to mention that not all of the soldiers within the CIS armed forces were droids, as the Commerce Guild and Corporate Alliance maintained their own organic troops alongside their droids. Korivar Fusiliers, Gossam Commandos, and Neimoidian Guards were deployed alongside droid forces in some scenarios. Most of the CIS special forces were also organic, utilizing the skills of prestigious mercenaries renowned for their martial prowess and/or hunting skills, like the Jabimai Nimbus Commandos, Trandoshan Slavers, as well as some of my own people, the Mandalorian Protectors, who fought for the CIS under Manda-LORE the Resurrector. On to vehicles, it's important to remember that most of the Confederacy's vehicles are either crewed by B1 series droids or fully automated with their own droid brains, essentially making them just big droids. But since they perform the roles of tanks, troop transports, assault vehicles, etc., we'll classify them as if they were manned. For light and medium vehicles, the Ground Armored Tank, or GAT, was a lightly armored but fast repulsor tank designed to counter the Republic's TX-130S Saber tank, while the older Trade Federation Armored Assault Tank, or AAT, continued to serve as the Confederacy's main battle tank as it had for the Trade Federation in years prior. The Corporate Alliance NRN-99 Persuader class Enforcer droid, sometimes called the Snail Tank, was a tracked medium armored tank with 2 heavy repeating blaster cannons, light blaster cannons, ion cannons, and missiles. Infantry droids would sometimes hitch a ride on the 2 side sponsons of the Enforcer droids to taxi them into battle. Speaking of transporting troops, the Trade Federation Multi-Troop Transport, or MTT, was a lumbering hulk that could carry 112 B1 battle droids on racks, along with 20 droidicas and 12 super battle droids, while the smaller Platoon Attack Craft, or PAC, can also carry 112 B1s. However, it's unarmed and provides none of the armored protection of the MTT. For artillery, the wheeled IG-227 Hellfire class tanks were highly mobile and packed a walloping 30 heat-seeking missiles in its 2 missile launcher pods, capable of taking out enemy aircraft, walkers, or a whole platoon of clone troopers with a single well-aimed missile. For more pinpoint accuracy over area of effect, the Heavy Artillery Gun, or HAG, was much slower, but its heavy cannon could lob energy projectiles much further. A highly unusual 3-legged walker, the Techno-Union Octopatara class Tri-Droid, came in 2 major variants. The smaller Combat Tri-Droid with laser cannons for taking out infantry and light vehicles, and the far larger Magna Tri-Droid with missile launchers and heavy laser cannons for taking out heavier targets and emplacements. Lastly, for air support units, common Vulture droids and Tri-Fighters, which I will get into in the naval portion of this guide, have been known to fly down from orbit to support ground troops. However, there were dedicated heavy aerial gunships, such as the Mechanized Assault Flyer, or MAF, and the later HMP droid gunship, both similarly shaped and armed with heavy rotating blaster turrets and missile pods. Apart from the various infantry droids and vehicles, the CIS did utilize quite a few super weapons as well. These are weapons of devastating power. However, they were either too impractical, too expensive, or were just simply destroyed before they could catch on. These included the Protodeca, the Seismic Tank, the Conqueror-class atmospheric dreadnought, and the Dark Reaper, originally built by Ulic Keldroma during the Great Sith War. Now we get to my favorite part, unit organization. It should be noted that battle droids weren't given ranks until you get up to the company level of unit organization, and from there, those droid officers would report to their organic commanders. We do know that there were organic officers that managed lower unit organization levels, especially when, say, only a company of droids were deployed to a planet, which did happen. Otherwise, those droid commanders would report directly to the Army's organic general in most cases. However, we're not given the ranks of organics other than general at the Army level of unit organization, so an educated approximation of the ranks of the lower level organic officers has been provided by my own judgment. The smallest unit within the CIS droid army was a squad, which consisted of 8 battle droids. Next size up was a platoon, which consisted of 7 squads of battle droids totaling 56 droids. A company consisted of 2 platoons, totaling 112 droids, which can be carried by a single MTT troop carrier, and was under the command of a lower-level OOM series command droid, which in turn could take its orders from an organic officer, most likely a captain. A battalion was made up of 7 companies, totaling 784 battle droids and their MTT transports, escorted by a squadron of 24 AATs. This unit was also commanded by an OOM command droid, which would get its orders from an organic officer carrying the rank of Major or higher. A Vanguard was a separate unit, specializing in breaking through heavy defenses and deploying droid troops on the other side, and it consisted of 11 MTT companies carrying 1,232 battle droids in total, escorted by 18 AATs, also commanded by an OOM command droid. A regiment consisted of 4 battalions and 1 vanguard, totaling 4,368 battle droids, commanded by an OOM droid receiving orders from an organic lieutenant colonel. An entire regiment can be carried aboard a single Trade Federation C-9979 landing craft. A division consisted of 5 regiments, totaling 21,840 battle droids and support droids, which would have probably been commanded by an organic colonel. A battle droid corps was made up of 5 divisions, totaling 109,200 battle droids plus support droids, and would have been commanded by an organic major general. And lastly, a droid army consisted of 2 corps, totaling 218,400 battle droids and support droids, the total complement of a Lucrehulk-class battleship, and was commanded by either an organic general, or in some cases, the organic captain of the Lucrehulk carrying the army. As to how many droid armies there were within the entire CIS military is unknown, but official estimates of the total numbers of battle droids produced by the Confederacy numbers in the quadrillions, which is by far the most realistic number we've had, compared to figures given to us for the Imperial Army, Stormtrooper Corps, and the Grand Army of the Republic. Before we move on to the Navy, I'm going to quickly go through some of the vehicle and support formations, skipping the unit organization of the organic soldiers for now, as they'll be covered in a future transmission about the respective megacorps making up the CIS military-industrial complex. Commerce Guild DSD-1 dwarf spider droids are usually fielded in groups of 4, and act as spotters for an OG-9 homing spider droid, which are usually deployed singularly. Techno-Union LM-432 crab droids are usually fielded in groups of 3, and the same goes for the Octopatara Combat Tri-Droid and the Octopatara Magna Tri-Droid. Lastly, Corporate Alliance NRN-99 Persuader droids are fielded in squads of 2 to 4. At last we come to the CIS Navy. Like the droid armies, the CIS Navy is also an amalgamation of forces from the different megacorps making up the CIS military-industrial complex, so there will be a host of different starfighters and warships that I probably won't cover, as I'm focusing on the main ones. It's important to keep in mind that many of the ships I'm about to discuss were built before the Anaxis War College classification system was established, so their names don't really match the classifications they fit into by modern standards, based on their size, armor, and armament, so I'm going to do the best I can at categorizing them by the modern system. Starting with starfighters, the Trade Federation Vulture droid is probably the most numerous of the Confederacy's starfighters, and possesses the unique ability to go from flight mode into walk patrol mode, followed by the Geonosian Nantex starfighter, which can be piloted by B-1s and saw some use with the IG Banking clan. The later droid Tri-Fighter was an extremely fast and maneuverable superiority starfighter, and could deploy swarms of Pistoka Dissembler droids or Buzz droids, capable of latching onto enemy starfighters and disabling their critical systems piece by piece. For more elite starfighters with their own hyperdrives, the Utapauan Porax P-38 saw some use by the Magna Guards, and the Belbalab 22 starfighter was a personal favorite of General Grievous's, and also had a bomber variant. Speaking of bombers, the Trade Federation possessed a few different variations of droid bombers that saw continued use in the Clone Wars, all of which were based off of the Vulture droid fuselage and droid brain. Next up are transports, which don't have much of a combat role, but were no less important to the Navy's mission of ferrying the Confederacy's droid armies to wherever they were needed. They include the Trade Federation's C-9979 landing craft, the Techno-Union Hard Cell class transport, and the Sheathipede class transport shuttle, to name a few. As for corvettes, the CIS didn't have many ships in the way of dedicated corvettes. However, there is documented use of hard cell class transports fitted with missile launchers being used as missile corvettes during an encounter with Thrawn's fleet in the unknown regions in 27 BBY. There were also the Hex deployers, used by the Sabayoth mercenary fleet, which was in the CIS's employ. Moving on to frigates, the Trade Federation Lupus-class missile frigate was still in use by the time of the Clone Wars, and a special frigate called the Wavecrest was developed by the Given of Yog Dul for the Separatist war effort around 20 BBY. The Commerce Guild Diamond-class cruiser, though called a cruiser, technically fits into the frigate classification, as it's only 200 meters and doesn't have much in the way of weaponry compared to a true cruiser. As with corvettes, the Confederacy didn't have a dedicated carrier per se, as both the Lucrehulk and the Providence classes, which I will get to soon, had pretty sizable fighter complements already. However, old Trade Federation Captor-class heavy munitions cruisers were converted into carriers during the Stark hyperspace conflict, and remained in service with the CIS Navy. On the subject of cruisers, this is where things get a little confusing with the Anaxis War College system, as the Banking Clan Munificent class star frigate, while called a frigate, at 825 meters long, is technically a heavy cruiser, given its size and armament. The Recusant-class light destroyer, on the other hand, at 1,187 meters long, teeters on the edge between a heavy cruiser and a star destroyer class, and given its heavy armament, has been known to go toe-to-toe with Republic Venator-class star destroyers. However, due to its armor and support role within the Navy, I'll leave it in the heavy cruiser class. Which brings me to Star Destroyers, and technically this class didn't exist until about 20 BBY, but the Providence-class carrier/destroyer, though designed to be a successor to the Republic's Dreadnought heavy cruiser, is probably the best candidate for a Separatist vessel in this class. It's over 1,000 meters long, and had sufficient armor, armament, and fighter complement to where I feel comfortable classifying it with the rest of the Star Destroyers. Another misclassed ship is the Techno-Union Bulwark-class battlecruiser, which is also classified as a Star Destroyer under the Anaxis War College system, since it was only 1,000 meters long. Though to be fair, these ships were beefy, and so heavily armored that they were known to be capable of ramming other starships. And lastly, we have the Trade Federation Lucrehulk-class battleship, which fulfills the battlecruiser role within the CIS Navy. The Lucrehulk was a converted container ship, stuffed to the brim with droids, vehicles, equipment, and about 1,500 droid starfighters. Like with the Army, the CIS Navy was also mostly manned by droids, working as gunners, pilots, engineers, deck crews, technicians, marines, security, etc. However, high-level bridge officers as well as commanders of individual vessels and the various groupings of vessels within the Navy were flesh-and-blood beings, as discussed earlier. We unfortunately don't have much info on the exact composition of each naval grouping, or if there were groupings with specific combat roles like the ones I described in one of my previous transmissions on the Imperial Navy, but we are at least given 5 different groups, which rank commands each group, and an estimation of how many ships in that group. The first group was a section, and could contain 2 to 4 vessels plus maintenance and support crew, which was commanded by a captain. Next, a flight consisted of 2 to 4 sections, or 4 to 16 vessels plus maintenance and support crews, and was commanded by a commodore. A squadron consisted of 3 to 4 flights, or 12 to 64 vessels plus support crews, and was also commanded by a commodore. A task group contained 3 to 10 squadrons, ranging from 36 to 640 vessels and their support crews, and was led by a rear admiral. While a task force consisted of 2 task groups, encompassing 72 to 1,280 vessels and their support crews, and was led by a vice admiral. And finally, a fleet consisted of 3 task groups, ranging from 200 to 4,000 vessels and their support crews, and was commanded by an admiral. The Separatists' withdrawal from Geonosis was a defeat for sure, but tactically advantageous, as they avoided a majority of their droid forces being destroyed in the first engagement, and unlike the Republic's fresh new clone army with only 200,000 immediate battle-ready units, the CIS had multiple armies and fleets ready to fortify their positions along the major trade routes. Battlefronts opened up on Atrakan, Ossus, and Excarga in the war's first few weeks, the former of which ended up being a year-long slugging match, but as the war rounded its first month, Dark Acolyte and General Severance Tan launched the first major offensive against the Republic. She learnt of a new Republic weapon called the Decimator Tank, and stole the prototypes during her assault on snowy Eridan Prime, using her new Decimator tanks to take out the Republic's power generation facilities on the volcanically active world of Serapin. However, she met her match in Jedi Master Ichu Shenjan, whose counteroffensive ground hers to a halt, and she eventually lost her life on Krant in Bothan space. Dooku himself led the next major offensive soon after, seeking the ancient superweapon known as the Dark Reaper, and learning the location of one of its main components after overwhelming a Republic listening post on Ren Var. The Republic caught wind that Dooku was digging for the Force Harvester on Roxas Prime and launched a counterattack, but were too late. Now having everything he needed, Dooku tested his new toy on Alaris Prime, Mon Calamari, and Bakura. However, when attempting to complete the Dark Reaper in its entirety at the ancient Sith Citadel on Thule, he was thwarted by Anakin Skywalker and a host of Jedi and clone forces. Several subsequent campaigns were launched with mixed results, and attacks on key strategic worlds to the Republic like Kamino, Oma Da'un, Dantooine, Mon Calamari, and Ilum were repelled, with the mighty banking clan headquarters on Munilinst falling to a counteroffensive led by Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. However, the war began to swing in the favor of the Confederacy when General Grievous finally made himself known. After crushing the Jedi's attempted assault on the droid factories at Hypori, where he fought 5 Jedi at once and defeating nearly 7 altogether, Grievous began leading his own campaigns against the Republic from the front lines. With Grievous coordinating the war, the Confederacy snatched major victories on worlds like Parcellus Minor, Murson, Jabim, and Argonar, before he launched his next major offensive in 21 BBY. Codenamed Operation Dirge's Lance, Grievous took 2 massive fleets, the CIS 1st and 3rd Fleets, and blazed a path of destruction up the Corellian trade spine and into the heart of the core worlds, obliterating planets from orbit like Duro and Humberine, releasing bioweapons on Lordovia and Kaikilius, only being stopped at Alderaan, which had suffered so much loss during its defense that it had dismantled all of its military capabilities after the battle and became a fully pacifist world. Meanwhile, CIS Admiral Duoningo and his fleet of new Bulwark-class battlecruisers broke the Republic's blockade at Fo-Rost, and was free to wreak his own havoc in the core worlds, facing off against the Republic fleet at Ixtalar, Alsakan, and Basilisk before meeting his end at the Battle of Anaxis. Towards the end of the second year of the Clone Wars, the Confederacy had the clear-cut upper hand, prompting the Republic to respond with a massive offensive that pushed the CIS out of the core and contained them in the Outer Rim, beginning the Outer Rim sieges in late 20, early 19 BBY. At Boz-Pity in the Mid-Rim, a surprise assault during fleet staging operations caught Dooku and Grievous off guard, damaging the cyborg general during an encounter with Jedi Master Mace Windu, and resulting in the departure of Asajj Ventress from the war. Meanwhile, at Seleucami, Sora Bulg headed a secret project to create the Confederacy's very own clone army, using the Nikto mercenary Bok, one of the last great warriors of the Morgukai tradition, as a genetic template. But a massive Republic assault besieged the world for 6 months, taking out Sora Bulg, Tol Skor, and every last Morgukai Shadow Clone warrior. The Confederacy's exodus from the core almost proved utterly disastrous when something that was not part of Sidious's plans occurred. During his evacuation from the besieged Trade Federation purse world of Cato Neimoidia, Newt Gunray left behind his Mechno chair, which he frequently used to communicate with both Sidious and Grievous. With Obi-Wan and Anakin's recovery of the Mechno chair, they used it to intercept Grievous's communications and ambush his fleet at Belderone, where he was attempting to move the Leadership Council, and later, the Jedi would come dangerously close to discovering the true identity of this mysterious Darth Sidious, before Grievous's next operation forced them back to the front lines. Under instructions from Lord Sidious and Dooku, General Grievous concentrated on prolonging the war. For every star system the Republic took, the Confederacy would take another, until the time was right for the ultimate strike at the heart of the Republic. Using secret hyper routes through the deep core provided by Darth Sidious, Grievous launched a massive assault on Coruscant, conducting a diversionary ground battle outside the government district while he abducted Chancellor Palpatine from his Jedi Guardians, slaying or injuring all in his path. With the Chancellor now aboard his flagship, Grievous broadcasted Palpatine's captivity on the HoloNet as he attempted to jump to hyperspace with his prize. The arrival of Anakin, Obi-Wan, and the Open Circle fleet, however, prevented that, and the former Master and Apprentice duo managed to board Grievous's Providence class and retrieve the Chancellor, narrowly escaping death in the flaming hulk of what was left of the Invisible Hand. The most significant casualty of the Battle of Coruscant was Count Dooku, who fell to Skywalker's blade on the Invisible Hand's observation deck. The fate of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, as well as the rest of the war, now rested on Grievous's duranium-armored shoulders, and at the behest of Sidious, he journeyed to Utapau, where Grievous had moved the Leadership Council after the disaster at Belderone to inform them that they were to be moved yet again, this time to a facility on Mustafar. With the Confederacy's auspicious head of state neutralized, Grievous became the prime target, and both the Jedi Council and the Galactic Senate believed that Grievous's elimination would force the Confederacy to capitulate and ultimately end the war. And they were right. Soon enough, clone intelligence units comprised of Null-class ARC troopers managed to locate Grievous on Utapau. As General Obi-Wan Kenobi and the Republic's 3rd Systems Army assaulted the Separatist fortifications on Utapau and engaged General Grievous in a lightsaber duel, battlefronts all over the Outer Rim were coming to their climactic conclusions, such as the Separatist invasion of Kashyyyk and the defenses of the Corporate Alliance, Commerce Guild, and banking clans remaining strongholds at Felucia, Mygeeto, and Murkana. After battling through the streets of Pao City, Kenobi managed to strike down General Grievous and relayed the news to Commander Cody, who in turn informed the Jedi Council. It was at this time that Anakin learned the truth about Palpatine, and confided in Master Windu, who was already on his way to the Chancellor's office to ensure he relinquishes his emergency powers. The Jedi's attempt to arrest Sidious failed miserably, costing the lives of Kit Fisto, Agen Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and Windu himself, and resulting in Anakin's defection to the dark side of the Force, as Sidious dealt with other Jedi across the galaxy, enacting Contingency Order 66, his new apprentice, Darth Vader, journeyed to Mustafar, where, after being greeted by the head of the Leadership Council and acting head of state, Newt Gunray, he proceeded to slaughter them all, and issue a master command for all droid units across the galaxy to shut down. It's apparent from Gunray's last words that the Separatist leaders were promised peace after Sidious overthrew the Republic and defeated the Jedi, perhaps with the CIS existing as their own sovereign state alongside Sidious's new empire. However, that was not the case, and with the massacre of the Leadership Council, the Confederacy of Independent Systems functionally ceased to exist. But some still clung to the ideals of the CIS and formed numerous separatist holdouts strewn across the Outer Rim, and some of the Confederacy's megacorporations refused to back down at first, as was the case with the Trade Federation, who reactivated their droid armies and fought Imperial forces at Farstein and the Hook Nebula before they were forced to surrender. Others utilized their own local militias, pirates, and mercenaries to hold out for as long as they could. But a renewed series of campaigns against these CIS holdouts over the next 3 standard years saw the Empire triumph in their reconquest of the Rim. As late as 16 to 12 BBY, a Geonosian named Gizor Delso reactivated a droid army on Mustafar, prompting Vader and the 501st Legion to put them down. Not without a costly battle, however. What battle droids remained were scavenged and sold on the black market, often used by criminal organizations, most famously the reformed Mandalorian Death Watch and the Zahn Consortium. By 2 BBY, with the founding of the Alliance to restore the Republic, most remaining Separatist holdouts threw in their lot with the rebellion, and we can see the early Rebel Alliance fleet being comprised of a few outdated Commerce Guild and Trade Federation ships, with one Rebel flagship being a heavily modified Providence-class cruiser named Rebel 1. Some extremely minor Separatist holdouts managed to survive all the way up to the New Republic era, and even some super battle droid units were fielded against Yuuzhan Vong warriors during their rampage across the Outer Rim. While the CIS itself was eventually extinguished, the fiery spirit of planetary independence and autonomy was not, and in a way, it sort of lived on in the form of the Confederation, a faction formed by Corellia and her allies during the Second Galactic Civil War in 40 ABY, though it too would be a short-lived nation.
This ends my findings on the Confederacy of Independent Systems. If you have any suggestions for future transmissions, don't be afraid to drop a comment. Special thanks to my Ori Ramakad tier patrons, Batterai, Bowfix, Cherryman, Hawk2274, Ian Waller, Jaleel, John Hollingsworth, Kyle Scarata, Kyonkir, Lieutenant Maverick 2, Dial Soap 130, Matt Patton, Mayor 4, The Commando Droid, Scruffy Looking Nerf Herder, Weston Simmons, Wirefox Terrier, Zim the Despot, and Zexend. If you'd like to support this channel, please visit my Patreon, where you can gain access to the official Manda-LORE Discord server and other perks. Or if you want to make a one-time donation, buy me a calf on Ko-Fi. Links are in the description. In the meantime, keep your comm channels open for future transmissions, and don't forget to subscribe. Tad Larkin, out.